Okay.
Okay, so as we know, we're reviewing May to August for a reason. Actually, we'll go further than August because this was back in August. And does anybody remember, before we begin, what happened in the end of August in the movement?
We had the canon, the formalization of the message.
Right. So this is tracing that history. I thought that was interesting as I've been putting together these this transcript. So it's tracing the history from the increase of knowledge to the formalization. And so right after this, these presentations, these two, right after these, she then gave the formalization. I thought that was a good backdrop to have as we go through these to understand where the direction was leading and how it was very systematic for all of us. So the plan for today is to really review. So this is Elder Test, we all know that. Review from May 2020 to today. I prepared a document that will give a chronological order of presentations and the content of those presentations. And I have pieces of that document within each slide, so we know where we're at, but I'm pretty sure that everybody has the document. And if you don't, maybe email me and let me know if you need me to send it out, or we can post it in the teacher chat, or it has been sent out in email a couple of times. So we're going to work through that. Of course, this review is not covering everyone's presentation, so it's not comprehensive of May 2020 to today. Of course, there's Elder Parminder and other people's contributions to the message, but I thought it would be beneficial to trace what I have taught over the last 15 months, what Elder Tess has taught over the last 15 months. And she's hoping that everyone is aware of the website Midnight Cry. I think we all are. And if anybody doesn't, take note of this to get it down, and it's in the slideshow. So if you don't have it, you can pull it out of the slideshow and open up that link. It will give you in chronological order a list of all the presentations that I have ever taught. You can reference the year and the date, and then if you click on it, it'll take you to the presentation itself. So with this website in one hand, with the document in the other, I'm hoping everything then becomes easily accessible or visible. I'm happy when I see people presenting on issues of equality, but I do fear that we have a tendency to leave behind a proper view of history, and also if we are properly referencing lines. So there's more to it than just giving a message on equality. Our power is in the structures, and we cannot afford to move beyond them. I'm also not trying to prove any points today. This review is reference material, so I'll be showing the points of what was taught in each presentation. But if you want to see that point proven, you're going to have to go to that presentation. And that's what's on our agenda, is to go through those presentations one by one. We all know that dispensation of the latter rain, the dispensation of the latter rain ended November 9, 2019. And around that time, I began to teach in more detail the history of the end of ancient Israel. We focused on that end of ancient Israel history into April of 2020. So we go to the Omega history of ancient Israel. That's the core theme from about November 2019 to April 2020, as we navigate our experience as the disciples and the history of Gethsemane and the cross and the tomb. This brought an inevitable question. Why did the Jewish nation get it so wrong? We're discussing this history, and they cannot recognize anything about Christ that seems familiar to them. There's nothing about him that fulfills their expectations. This is where the study on the golden calf, the Apis bull, came from. So we're going to start stepping through the presentations from the 16th of May, worshiping the Apis bull. And this study becomes our increase of knowledge in the same time frame as the counter-revolution begins with the death of George Floyd. Without going into any details, I'm going to say that the formalization is about upon us. So this is the increase of knowledge, and the formalization is upon us. So as far as what I have taught, not ignoring what other people have taught, we are tracing our journey from the increase of knowledge here to the formalization, from Concord to Exeter. Concord began for us on the 16th of May with the study of the golden calf. It developed because we had been for months looking at the end of ancient Israel, and wherever the Jewish nation went wrong, we know parallels where Adventism went wrong. So we compared and contrasted the two and traced the issue that the Jewish nation had with idolatry from Egypt to Rome. A second study, there was 2 presentations on the 16th of May, was called The Idolatry of Conservative Adventism. So we were already stepping into application. If we had to look into paganism to see where the Jewish nation went wrong, we had to look into Protestantism to see where Adventism went wrong. In the same way that the golden calf linked the Jewish nation to idolatry or paganism, we had to investigate the links between Laodicean Adventism and Protestantism. So from here also starts a very in-depth look into the history of Protestantism from 1798, and we kept reviewing that history all up until today. Just like we went back to the golden calf to their alpha history, we went back now to the alpha history of the Millerites. And just like we know there were 2 streams in Catholicism, we saw 2 streams within Protestantism. We saw those 2 streams illustrated in 1798 itself with the work of Jedediah Morse, and immediately we see the issues of conspiracy theories centered around a Protestant fight over secret societies and the Illuminati. So most of the board work is either taken from some of the ones I did, taken some of the ones that you did, some of you did, or straight screenshots. So we have idolatry that they pick up from Egypt. When we come down to this history, 1798, you have 2 streams of Protestantism. You have 2 streams of Protestantism here, and like you had the 2 streams also in Catholicism. And we went through this in our review that we did last week, I think it was, with Jedediah Morse and William Bentley, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. When you divide that out, it's right here. So moving to the 23rd of May, here we seem to take a detour. We started looking at the construction of the Middle East, the split of the Middle East between 2 superpowers, Saudi Arabia and Iran. You have Saudi Arabia and Iran and their proxies. Putting that to one side, we went back to the Apis bull. We repeated and enlarged that study of the golden calf. Then we went back to 1798 Protestant history and repeated and enlarged on the split within Protestantism. So we saw this split in Protestantism. The messenger is raised up, and then you have here you have the prophet, and the Sabbath comes back in. So it's preceded by a period of darkness. This is preceded by a period of darkness. You have a messenger, and Moses is the prophet. And this was the split within Protestantism. You have Thomas Jefferson and Bentley on the liberal side. This is the Protestantism divided. Then you have the conservative side with Jedediah Morse, where you had John Adams, the issue of church and state, immigration, and freedom of the press, the enforcement of morality, conspiracy theories. So moving on to the 30th of May, and we'll go through these, we all know, in more detail as we do each one individually. Moving on to the 30th of May, from Mary Stuart Ralph to Walter Veith. We're still building on the argument that the way that ancient Israel held on to paganism, which you can trace from their alpha, Adventism held on to Protestantism, which you can trace from their alpha. So we are constantly then having to grow our understanding of what Protestant even is because how can we say Adventism held on to Protestantism if we don't understand the history of Protestantism? So we had a look here at the methodology and the mindset and worldview of Walter Weiss. We start to connect that to the worldview of Protestantism from 1798 and their fight over secret societies. So automatically, when we're looking at Protestantism within Adventism, we're immediately forced to look at the subject of conspiracy theories. So we see that the subject of conspiracy theories was back here on the conservative side. And then we see that same aspect, conspiracy theories, for us. And on the 6th of June, 2020, we studied ignorance and the Ramsey theory. So we can understand how conspiracy theories develop. This is where we tie in the study from the 23rd of May, the whole mindset of Weithism, the methodology around Walter Weiss. And we look back at what we understand about the Middle East, and then we show Walter Weiss' view on the Middle East and see how his view is popular among conservative US society. His view on the Middle East is formed by ignorance and the Ramsey theory, the ingredients of a conspiracy theory. So this study on June 6th is really showing how conspiracy theories develop and are defended. At the end of the study, we answer a question that someone had on the one world government, and we showed how it's possible to have one core belief, but depending on the methodology you take to that belief, forms what you expect that to look like in real life. And those two ideas about what it looks like are polar opposites. So that's June 6th and the ignorance of Ramsey theory. So this is the two sides. One belief that there's be one world government, but depending on your methodology, conspiracy theories will lead you to this. The 10 King Confederation, globalism, UN, satanic deep state, secret societies, the Rothschilds, the Illuminati, and Soros and Bill Gates, or parable methodology, which is what this movement uses, which is what God gave us line upon line, and parable methodology to understand and see correctly the 10 kings, the USA, the dictatorship over the UN, republicanism plus Protestantism equals church and state, the one tribe over the 9 tribes, 1989, the 2 superpowers, and the one superpower leads to the one superpower. World War I, Wilhelm I plus World War II, which is Hitler, equals World War III, Trump. So the right methodology in our studies being used, using the right methodology, brings us to the right understanding of our work and our message. On the 13th of June, we moved on to a 2-part presentation in which I think Luke is with us. Thank you, Luke. You just recently reviewed that for us, which was really helpful. I try to juggle I think it was Fell's prayer, trying to juggle all these things in our mind at the same time. So review is always helpful to me. So we just went through that recently. And again, we're constantly layering our understanding of ancient and modern Protestantism as a way to understand ancient and modern Adventism, which has all come from the original subject of the Apis Bull. So point 1, we looked at the history surrounding 1844. We know that Protestantism was split in 1798, and we looked at its split in the 1844 history. But this split formed what they call a religious civil war before the political civil war began. So looking at 1844, it formed what they call a religious civil war, preceding the political civil war. Then we went back and added to what we had said the week previously on conspiracy theories. And we showed that connected with the ignorance of and the Ramsey theory. Also comes in racism when you see when you use these methods. We looked at the stream of Protestantism that we described as dangerous that embraced conspiracy theories. And we looked at how they operate today. And from about the 1970s, with a desire to impact not just politics, but every level of society. We looked at the organized fashion in which they have had success in this. Moving on to the 20th of June, Civil War in America's churches. Here we give quite a bit of history. We go right back to 1619, which was part of our message in 2019. We already knew that racism existed in 1619, slavery. At the very birth of the United States, it was already there. We see that church and state existed in 1619 and for a long time afterwards. So you have racism and the Sunday laws from 1619, and we're going to add to that and say we also had sexism and homophobia from 1619. And the reason that we're looking into the history is because it affects what we expect to see at the Sunday law. It has a profound effect upon our expectations. Then we looked at the history of the First Amendment when Thomas Jefferson split church and state. As we are covering the history of Protestantism, especially a profound history of Protestantism in the 19th century, we addressed the question about why did the prophet of Adventism not discuss any of this? Even in 1888, when the issues are external political events, why do we have to go to A.T. Jones to know what was happening? Because she does not tell us. So we looked at the limitations of a female prophet in the 1800s, which is one point I wanted to make to say these external events are so significant. Her limit in talking about external politics does not mean they were not extremely significant. And we saw that very clearly in the presentations previous discussing the spiritual declension of 1844. We then discussed the danger of left-wing streams copying the methodology of the right, that the criticism of Donald Trump is no excuse to form this conspiracy theories about him, these conspiracy theories about him. He's bad enough, obviously. And we needed to be guarded against that danger. We began to look at two different interpretations of religious freedom, but we're going to talk about that more in the future. Moving on to the 27th of June, the state nationalism. We repeat and enlarge a point that we've made a couple of presentations before of how, depending on your methodology, you can have two different perspectives of one common belief. Then we started looking at Protestant history, American history, and we studied how the South slowly developed this Southern identity, which became the Confederacy at the beginning of the Civil War. We don't quite go in that much detail in this presentation. We do in the future one. But we're particularly looking at the Protestant denominations in the South and how those denominations moved from condemning slavery to endorsing slaves. So how did those ones endorse slavery? Those Protestants in the South, how did they endorse slavery?
Pulling out, thus saith the Lord.
And what was their thus saith the Lord?
Abraham had slaves.
Yeah, that you can prove slavery from the Bible. Thus saith the Lord. Slavery is in the Bible, and God, in their eyes, condones it. So it was okay. So they used the Bible to defend slavery and actually endorse it. Here we looked at, this was the work of liberal wing Adventists, and many within the movement were falling into, there might have been a word missing, might have been something that I couldn't get from her. This was the work of a liberal wing Adventist, and many within the movement were falling into the trap of looking to liberal Adventism for answers. At the same time, we're repeating and enlarging this history in our presentations. Some people were trying to look into the same history, but they were going to liberal Adventist sources. My issue with liberal Adventism is it's usually just conservatism that they've glossed over. So you've got, there's a lot of points here to take, but that's a big one. As we now go in, for those that have watched the Vespers one, I'll have to watch the other one that just got posted tonight. But as she navigates us through taking apart the liberal side, and not just the internal, but also the external. So her issue with liberal Adventism is it's usually just conservatism that they've glossed over. And their methodology is just conspiracy theories made to look nicer. In this article, people were sharing to go into the history. To be honest, it was just a fantasy full of mistakes. So addressing this point was a warning. We're going to go into this history, but be careful of your sources. Liberal Adventism does not use our methodology ever. Even if it looks deceptively close, it's not our methodology. So they're liable to make a lot of mistakes. We then went back into history, particularly 1844 to the Civil War. We saw that period of Millerite history was all about Texas and expansion. How the USA could have taken Mexico in that time period, but didn't want it. Why didn't the USA want Mexico?
They weren't white.
Right. Then we look at the Articles of Secession put out by the Confederate States in 1861 and the argument of states' rights. That last thought really ties into the next presentation done on the same day, Don't I Have the Freedom? We discussed the importance of understanding the history correctly because it impacts our expectations of the future. In that context, we looked at the whole 1888 history of Sunday legislation and how the arguments of freedom and religious liberty were used to enact this Sunday legislation. Still looking at this split within Protestantism, we looked at 1919, the end of World War I history, and they attempt to form the League of Nations. This is called by some the birth of Christian fundamentalism, because again, one faction of that split within Protestantism was dead set, I think it is, against the League of Nations, which we can connect to 1798, their fear of secret societies. So they didn't want the League of Nations because of their fear of secret societies back in 1798. So tracing that on the line, we can connect today, the UN. We're just adding more and more details onto this common thread. We discussed 1861 and 1863 and the work of organization. We made application to our present harvest and showed how organization was a shaking and testing issue. We showed how those opposed to correct organization made the arguments that it conflicted with their freedom and religious liberty. But we can see that with nationalism today as it impacts the movement and ministries. I think this is the only presentation where we compare and contrast that work of organization to today. It's an important compare and contrast. Then the first camp meeting of the increase of knowledge was Canada. So through this document, the standalone presentations are in green. And that question came up with us, Christine, I think with everybody, but you explained it. This is how she defined it. The blue ones were camp meetings and the green ones were standalone. I think that was similar to what you said. You said it, I think it was the Midnight Watch, might mean the same thing, I don't know, but they weren't camp meetings, and she may have been somewhere else, but it was but standalone. So that's how, because I was trying to figure that out too. So this document, the standalone presentations are in green and the camp meetings are in blue. The first two camp meetings, we haven't divided it into presentations. For the first 2 camp meetings, we just did a list of what was taught in the whole camp meeting overall. After that point, we start dividing it into presentation by presentation. So in July 2020, there's a Canada camp meeting. We discuss how we are in the history of the wilderness, but also wanting to look at where we are overall on the lines that we have located, we're locating ourselves overall on the lines. So where we are on the lines. Then we looked at Ellen White's first vision of the path. We showed this path really as a constructed reform line, tracing the challenges of the journey and the difficulty at harvest. That narrowing path is our Apis bull Protestantism gets simplistically stripped from us. Then at the point of time, at the time of trouble, at the beginning of the harvest, there's no path beneath their feet in this period of time here. Nothing holds them in this movement except the cords, which we understand to be the lines, our parable teaching, which is the core of the message. And anyone who is in this movement for any other reason will fall away in this time unless we're held by those cords, by the reform lines and the periods that we've been living through since November 2020. Every other reason to be in this movement is stripped away. Anyone in the movement for any other reason will leave. She points out, I don't remember if it's in part 2 or in another presentation, but she comments on people of us in the movement claiming to be holding on to the cords, but not accepting the message. We revised these cords that hold us particularly, Acts 27, and then how we form our understanding, 2014, as midway. And then through this camp meeting was the first time we identified Concord as being May of 2020 with the death of George Floyd. This is the first time we identified not only the death of George Floyd, but the Apis bull study was the increase of knowledge, May 25th, the external date. Here we also began to look at what happened in 2019, but in the context of the King of the North versus the King of the South and spheres of influence. And we discussed all the countries here that operate as a sphere of influence between these 2 superpowers, Venezuela, Libya, Yemen, etc. In presentation 7 and 8 of the camp meeting, we started to discuss what good advice means. On the 25th of July, we passed the camp meeting now, and it's a Sabbath presentation. Equality can only be found on the path. So the path we're referring to is the path discussed at the Canada camp meeting, Ellen White's first vision, and those cords that hold us. We reviewed some of what was taught in Canada very briefly. We discussed how the messages have been developing. And then we start to look at liberalism. She's going to make this point again, which is often just rebranded conservatism, looking at sexism within the left. We discussed that the increasing habit of calling difficult women a Karen, how this is just the methodology and the behavior of the right. So that is a behavior of those that are on the left, but she's saying it's just the methodology and the behavior of the right, calling difficult women a Karen. The only hope that people have, as was said through the Canadian camp meeting, is to go back to the lines. Those lines will tell you where you stand. They will tell you how to behave, not just in your personal life, not just in your church life. They will teach you how to view this movement as an organization. They will teach you how to view external events on both sides of the political spectrum correctly and how to respond to those events correctly. Those lines keep us in a dead center of the pathway. You let go of a line, you go into one ditch or the other ditch. Either ditch is not safe. Either ditch does not practice equality. After this, we're going to answer two questions that have been asked in various corners of the movement. One question was the challenge and idea that Christ even intended to return in Millerite or 1888 history. So we answered that question some way, but we do come back to that in a later presentation and do it in more detail. The second question that was being asked around the movement was, if we're good enough, can we prevent the Sunday law? But this was less of a question and more of a fight, to be honest, because people were using that argument to say that we should be externally visible, externally fighting, externally protesting. And to add weight to that desire, they were also saying that the Sunday law became our fault if we didn't fight. So I answered that conflict within the movement with a compare and contrast. And here's from that presentation, the compare and contrast, where she went through and showed the different quotes. Deferred in mercy, the long night of gloom is trying. This is 1868, but the morning is deferred in mercy, because if the master should come, so many would be found unready. God's unwillingness to have his people perish has been the reason of so long delay. That's Testimonies, Volume 2, page 194. And written in 1868. 1856, 3 groups. A conference was held at Battle Creek in May 1856. But we were yet to pass through another severe trial. At the conference, a very solemn vision was given me. I saw that some of those present would be food for worms, some subjects for the 7 last plagues, and some would be translated to heaven at the second coming of Christ without seeing death. Comment up there to the top that James White sees slavery continue to the end of all earthly governments. So this was 1856. There were 3 groups being pointed out. So the end was to come. 1900 and 1903, the work might have been done had the purpose of God been carried out by his people in giving to the world the message of mercy. Christ would, ere this, have come to the earth, and the saints would have received their welcome into the city of God. Testimonies, Volume 6, page 450. I know that if the people of God had preserved a living connection with him, if they had obeyed his voice, they would today be in the heavenly Canaan. That's the General Conference Bulletin, March 30th, 1903. So 2 quotes saying that he would have come in this history. So we have these 2 quotes that say he would have come in this history, and we have quotes saying that he would have come in this history. Again, on the 1888 history and the movements now in progress in the United States to secure for the institutions and usages of the church the support of the state, Protestants are following in the steps of papists. Nay, more, they are opening the door for the papacy to regain in Protestant America the supremacy which he has lost in the old world. That's interesting when we look at that based on what we know, what the lines teach us, that it is Protestantism that puts the papacy back on the throne. So they are opening the door for the papacy to regain in Protestant America the supremacy which he has lost in the old world. And that which gives greater significance to this movement is the fact that the principal object contemplated is the enforcement of Sunday observance, a custom which originated with Rome and which she claims as the sign of her authority. It is the spirit of the papacy, the spirit of conformity to worldly customs, the veneration for human traditions above the commandments of God that is permeating the Protestant churches and leading them on to do the same work of Sunday exaltation which the papacy has done before them. And that's the Great Controversy, 573, paragraph 1. So compare and contrast. God's people were not ready. We did not see the cataclysmic external events, so the Millerites failed. That's the alpha history. The omega history, the 144,000 movement is succeeding. Trump, dictatorship, nationalism around the world, cataclysmic events are happening. The Great Controversy comes to a point of conflict. Internal, God's people succeeding. External, cataclysmic events are succeeding. After the cross, the priests do not understand the nature of the kingdom. A right understanding will give us the ability to know our work. Moving into August, introduction, the idolatry of conservative Adventism. Here we looked at the whole of the reform line, but we were looking particularly in one more detail at the repeating pattern, Boston, Concord, Exeter. People were losing sight of how the message had ever brought us to the subject of equality. So we also traced that on a reform line. And here we go back again over the evidence that we have that Christ intended to return in the two histories of failure, which we just went through. Then we go back and repeat and enlarge on our original topic that we keep going back to, tracing Protestantism, its journey in the United States, and its split. August 8th, the Speaking of a Nation, part 1 and 2. So when I say parts 1 and 2, this is not two presentations. It's one presentation divided into two segments, two YouTube videos, to try and make this work for the translators a little easier when there was no live translation. So it's before they were doing translation on Zoom. So anytime you see parts 1 and 2, this is one presentation, but it's been split into YouTube videos. On the 8th of August, we looked at the development of the message from simple to more complex. We used the external understanding of the atom as an example and the internal example of our understanding of the King of the South. Then we went to the great controversy, 440 to 442, continued looking at the Sunday law, trying to separate the false narrative that Adventism has developed that we take for granted. But in many ways, it's indefensible. So we go back to Adventism's favorite book of the Sunday law, the Great Controversy. We look what it says about the lamb-like beast, its horns, and its speech. And we make the claim that those horns never break. Then we look at the three branches of government and how Ellen White says those three branches relate to the Sunday law. How she puts weight on the judicial and the legislative, whereas Adventism places all their attention on the executive. And going to that point, what does she mean there? Adventism, what does it mean that Adventism puts all their attention on the executive? As it pertains to this movement, maybe somebody understands that question.
Is she talking about where we are looking at Trump solely when Ellen White emphasizes the judicial branch, the judges, and the legislative, the Senate, the Congress?
Right. And who was president in 2014, our Sunday law?
Obama.
And he's what?
Liberal? Democrat?
Democrat, yeah. So by placing all the attention on the executive and all the rest of what they have wrong, they're expecting this globalism to come in, and it comes through the liberal branch. So they're not looking at what's going on in the judicial and legislative. They're looking at saying that it has to happen under a Democrat president, which is actually where we were at in that history from 2014 until we were corrected.
Right. So when you have your focus on the president, and at that time happened to be President Obama, and under him came the same-sex marriage, and therefore this was bad. So President Obama was bad.
I don't know if I want to say he was bad. He was
prophetically, that's what they thought.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Correct. Got it. So yes, according to them, they thought he was bad. I misunderstood how you said that. My bad. So yeah, so they're looking at looking at the Democrat president as being the one that brings in the Sunday law.
They're also just looking at the presidency period, waiting for a time that the president is going to be, in bed with the papal power directly. And that's how they're missing the boat, because we know it's through the daughters whom Adventism unwittingly is aligning themselves with.
Right. So then there's the 15th of August, the message in its divine development. How it has always developed from overly simplistic to more complex. And she talks about that in those recent presentations about the dangers of simplicity. And if I understood what she was saying, because sometimes I can see the simplicity, but the simplicity can be wrong if you don't walk through the complex first. Because it seems that when we go through the complex, you get to the simplicity. Anybody else comment on that? But if you don't walk through the complex, you're going to misunderstand and make a mistake with the simplicity. So showing how the king of the south developed, which we covered before, but that's verse 40 of Daniel 11. So we should expect the same of verse 41, which is the subject of the Sunday law. We looked at the Sunday law waymark for ancient Israel, which is 34 AD, how the stoning of Stephen is absolutely meaningless without the context of their prior history. So for the Sunday law for Adventism, will look absolutely meaningless unless they can also trace the development towards it. So Adventism, if they don't trace the development towards it, then it's meaningless. So this presentation is really expanding on the presentation directly before. We go back into the judicial and the legislative branches. We see how the Federalist Society has hijacked the judicial branch over the last 30 to 40 years. We go into more detail about how 2014 was a turning point for both branches of government.
What does the B stand for?
Where are you looking at? Up here?
Yeah, all the B's.
Oh, I got to remember, Robert. I know because I came up with the same question and I knew what it was, and I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden on it as well. Robert, I think it's yours.
I think they're battles.
Battles? Okay. Yeah, probably so.
Okay. Yeah, it's a Diadochi War.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, these are the
Thank you.
battles. Yeah, you're right, because this would be Ipsus, Heraclea, Beneventum. Did I say those right? And
Was it Asculum and then Beneventum?
I was going to say Panium, but I was looking for the right word. It's Asculum. Yeah. Asculum. Thank you, Robert. So this is looking at the Sunday law, the legislative to the Congress, the Senate to the House, the judicial is the Supreme Court and the lower courts. And this is where our focus is. That's where Ellen White puts our focus to. But we see that Adventism puts the focus on the executive. We see as it grows to speak like a dragon at the Sunday law. Got the increase of knowledge. What I think is really interesting is, and maybe you guys followed this along better than I did, but while we looked at the priest line a lot of times it seemed like the 144,000 line, it was there, but the focus was on the priest line. But all the while, the priest line had the 4 dispensations, this dispensation, this one all the way to the Sunday law, this one here, and this one here. We know about our 2 little waymarks in between each one. So she was showing us, while we were looking at the priest line, she did show them simultaneously. She did show them simultaneously, but while looking at the priest line, we see the increase of knowledge, but simultaneously we're looking at the 144,000 line and seeing the increase of knowledge for the Sunday law was 2019. And that began back in Brazil with the studies In God We Trust. And then you come to 2021 to see the formalization of the message. And then the nation speaks like a dragon. So these are the two little waymarks, Boston, Concord, and Exeter, and then a test. The 19th of August was not a Sabbath presentation. It was titled False Freedom, a Prophetic Pattern. It shows how we had two back-to-back testing time periods with parallel issues and a shut door as a dividing line between the two time periods. We expanded on what we already taught before, that conservatism and sexism can be both open and disguised. They can be overt, but it can also be practiced in a way that is more tolerable to mainstream society. We discussed the importance of relying on methodology. So this was the 2019, and you had Gethsemane on this side of 2019 and the wilderness on this side of 2019. Who remembers how that was broken down?
Are you talking about what was on each side?
Yeah, somewhat, yeah. What is 29 represents two things. 29. 2019 represents two things.
Yeah, I remember discussing this because there was a confusion. But so 2019 represents the cross.
Correct.
And baptism.
And baptism. And Ellen White links that. And she links, maybe somebody remembers the verse in Isaiah. There's a verse in Isaiah, and I'm drawing a blank at the verse that she links in there, and it's not on this particular board, but she links the verse in there. So you've got Gethsemane and then the wilderness, both two dangerous periods of time for this movement. And then the importance of relying on methodology, because only the methodology can do that and put two different things in the same place so that we can rightly understand it. So on the 29th of August, communication technology and the gospel. Now I know this is one that hasn't been done, if anybody's going to take that one on. But she does review it in the very next one, which I think is the structure of our alpha. So if anybody takes that one on, the board work actually is done for this if you want it. She just reviews it in the next presentation. So the communication technology and the gospel, here we laid out all of our reformatory movements and how each time there's a reformatory movement, there's also external mechanisms for spreading that message under development. How Ellen White says that Christ couldn't come until Rome had made this type of world peace and roads and shipping. We see that again in the Protestant Reformation, in the printing press, Millerite history, and in our history. So what was the Millerite history?
Telegraph, railroads, steamships.
Yep.
Okay, and what's our history?
WWW.
So, but every time a mechanism to share information is developed, it can be used by both sides. Moving on from there as a separate thought, we showed how 1964 Civil Rights Act directly connects to our reform line. We locked the Civil Rights Act into its prophetic place. Then another separate thought we're going back now to the history. So we do these other detours, but we're going back to history and Protestantism. We show how slavery can be described as paying homage to the papacy. Somebody's got their mic open. If you can, there's some background noise. Thank you. Okay, so here's the breakdown of it. The end of ancient Israel, the Pax Romana, Roman peace on land and sea and roads and communication. There was this 200-year period, about this 200-year period. The term Pax Romana, which literally means Roman peace, refers to the time from the period of 27 BCE to 180 CE in the Roman Empire. This 200-year period saw unprecedented peace and economic prosperity throughout the empire, which spanned from England in the north to Morocco in the south, and Iraq to the east. So that's in the time of preparing for the time of Christ. And then in the Protestant Reformation, you had the printing press, which was for communication. And there's an article if anybody wanted to read it there as well. And then also the beginning then of modern Israel, the Millerite history, train, steamboats, communication. You had the telegraph in 1844, what has God wrought to spread the results of the election. So you had trains, the first steam power passenger train, December 25th, 1830. This is when Miller's getting ready to preach, right? So then you have Miller, 1830 to 1840. There's 1,800 miles of track laid. And then the first call to 1840 to 1850, there's 9,000 miles of track laid. And then to the world in 1850 to 1860, there's more than 30,000 miles of track laid. So it was a network serving all states. And then the end of ancient Israel, as we know, is the World Wide Web. Communication, 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 communication. And that there's no life outside of this movement. So you had the civil rights movement where she was just stating that it's fits into where it fits into history. She lines that up here. You got 1989 to 1798. This is when the Jesuit order was disbanded in 1964. There's 25 years and 25 years. You have the Civil Rights Act. And then you're seeing the rise again of persecution here and the rise of persecution here. And there's the references if you to go back and study this line here. So the 5th of September, the structure of our alpha parts 1 and 2. Again, it's one presentation. The first 2 dot points are repeat and enlarge. First 2 dot points, repeat and enlarge what we've already done. For people asking questions and struggling with some of those concepts, or also sharing ideas and enlarging upon those concepts. So we studied what we had done the week before on how technology advances at each reformatory movement. We go again over how we can have one common belief and 2 different perspectives of that belief. Having a right understanding, the right methodology, that the one side has conspiracy theories, the other has parable methodology. And it's having a correct understanding of that parable methodology to come to the right understanding, the right perspectives of that belief. Then back to our alpha history as we have done from May 16th. Now we're going to construct our alpha history, show its differences to modern history, and we used the alpha of ancient Israel as a second witness to that construction. So it had taken some months to get here, but this was our destination in wanting to have a constructed model of an alpha history and show where it is the same, but more importantly, where it is different from an omega history. So we went through this a minute ago on a different slide. They both believe in one world government. And on this side, you have liberalism, this side conservatism. Liberalism is the globalists, the UN, the satanic deep state, QAnon, secret societies, Rothschilds. In this, Trump is a hero to get rid of all of this. And on this side, you have Trump as a dictator. Nationalism, and this is parable methodology. This is conspiracy theory methodology that leads you to this. So the 2 streams there. Do you have a comment or question?
I don't know, is that correct? You go back that slide again, please.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand because I thought it was more a liberal understanding that gives us the correct perspective. So it's something seems reversed here. I'm not understanding. Because the conservatives are the ones that think Trump's a hero. That are full of nationalism.
The way she was saying it, I think the way she was saying it is Trump's going to destroy all this.
Okay.
If I understand it correctly, and we'll see it when we go through the reviews, but if for those that have this view that use the conspiracy theories, that use this view, liberalism is the one that's doing all of this work, and Trump is a hero against all this work. That's my understanding.
Okay, so he's against it, but that's not what the liberals are for, because the liberals are not being the ones who are saying that there's a deep state. It's the conservatives that are. So,
But it's the conspiracy theories that bring them there. So they all have the same view of one world government. But
yeah.
parable teaching brings you here to see Trump as the dictator. Conspiracy theories brings you to understand this and see this.
Yeah, but it's not under the umbrella of conservatism that we come up with the understanding parables correctly, and World War I plus World War II equals World War III. So that's where it's throwing me off. That's all.
Yeah, well, parable teaching gives us the right view, this view. Maybe I'm not explaining it right, but parable teaching us and the methodology, the right understanding gives you this view, and you will see Trump as a dictator.
Okay, that's
Does that make
helpful.
sense?
Thank you.
Okay, because I know it kind of confused me too. And so both having one belief that there's going to be one world government, but two streams, and the parable teaching will give you the correct view and see that Trump is a dictator. Conspiracy theories give you this view, and they will see Trump as a hero to get rid of that, against all that. If I said that right, part of it I might have said wrong. So, but I think you followed it. Anybody else on that? Confused on that?
Yeah, we're a little confused too. I know this was confusing because one was a threat, and I remember something like this being explained as a threat.
And that's the correct way to state that. But just before you go on, just to repoint it out so we can, for my own self, or for anybody else, we go over again how we can have one common belief, one world government, and two different perspectives of that belief. So this is one belief, and these are two perspectives. And how did we get to those two perspectives? So go ahead.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm still a little bit confused. So I don't even know how to put into right perspective. So you got liberalism, globalism, UN. But if you have, liberalism, globalism, excuse me, UN, you don't have secret societies, Rothschild, Bill Gates, vaccine. I think, I don't know, not sure what I think. That's
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I think I understand the confusion, and I've had to really think about it, because it's the liberalism and the conservatism that kept throwing me in those two boxes. But then I realized the box to the left is all they see is bad. They see liberalism as bad. People who see Trump as a hero see liberalism as bad, see globalism as bad, see the UN as bad. Those, and then it switches up there, satanic deep state. So those are the smaller points underneath their view. Is that right? And then if you are on the right side of the stream to the right, you will recognize that conservatism is bad, and that nationalism is bad, and you'll see that the USA has become a dictatorship. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to follow how you said it, but I think so, because I know it seems confusing. So there's one belief
It is.
that there will be one world government, right?
I think maybe I have it, maybe.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I remember the word threat. That's what keeps throwing me out. There's no word threat here, but I do remember that she used the word threat. So Trump as a hero liberalism and globalism is a threat. So the UN, Satanic, QAnon, this is what they believe in. And because this is what the conspiracy theories believe in,
Right,
right?
right.
And so liberalism is a threat to Trump. They see them, and those who believe like him as a hero. And then those who see Trump as a dictator. Okay, so those who see Trump as a dictator. Oh, yeah.
I think the part that makes it confusing is because we think that conservatism should be on the other side or vice versa. But if we think about it as it's one belief with two perspectives, and these two perspectives here are built upon two streams of information. One stream is parable methodology, and this is then your perspective of things, which is the right perspective. And one perspective, did I say that right? One stream, that's what I want to say, one stream is built upon conspiracy theories, and this is where it leads you to have this view. The conspiracy theories lead you, if you think about Adventism and where they're at when it comes to all the conspiracy theories and supporting Trump, conspiracy theories lead you to this view, which is the wrong view of what is happening. So this is the correct view, and this is the wrong view.
But what I don't understand, because there's something missing, because liberalism is a right view, and conservatism is the wrong view. So not everything in that box can be said. Yeah. So I understand the point that there's two sides to the same one world government, two views, but liberalism is good and conservatism is bad. Right? So we can't just say that
But the view is that you see that conservatism is bad. That's the correct view, that you see that conservatism is bad. Does that make sense?
I'm confused too. I thought that, I thought that the conservatives have Trump as a hero. Because, well, let me see.
Well, we'll go through.
Yeah.
We'll go.
Okay, yeah, we'll
go through these studies again, and because I pulled these off the board work. This is a particular one that I did. Pulled these off the board work and then pulled them out of the study that I already did. So we'll go through it, and if we need to, we can bump it in. Just a quick review. I don't think we're going to have time today to go back to that particular study to kind of look at it a little bit, but it is one to go back and reference if anybody wants to better understand it. But the way I understand what it's showing here is that if you have parable methodology, you'll come to the correct understanding that conservatism is bad, and that the USA is a dictatorship. You've got going into the USA and the UN and the Republican Party, parables, and you're going to come to the understanding of World War I plus World War II equals World War III. You're going to see Trump as a dictator. So if you follow conspiracy theories like Protestantism and Adventism, if you follow conspiracy theories, this is the view that you're going to have, which is a wrong view. The wrong view of who is bringing. Let's put it this way: who's bringing the Sunday law? You have a wrong understanding of who's bringing the Sunday law.
Can I say something?
Yes.
So I see where some people can be confused. What it is that liberalism in this box here. Sorry, I'm using my cursor, but nobody can see. Liberalism. This is how those who are on the side of conservatism view liberalism, if that makes sense. So they see liberalism as, when they believe in conspiracy theories, this is what they see liberalism as. So when they view liberalism in this light, they see Trump as a hero, if that makes sense.
Because he's against liberalism and globalism.
Right.
And but what it's ultimately saying is, who's bringing in the Sunday law? Adventism believes that this liberal stream is bringing in the Sunday law. They're doing all of that with their same-sex marriage and all of that. They're bringing in the Sunday law. But the true perspective is that it's conservatism that is doing that is bringing in the Sunday law because of inequality. That help? Maybe?
The one thing that makes it confusing for me is that QAnon is on the.
Oh my, that's the same thing too.
Well, if
Yeah.
you're following the right perspective, the right parable methodology, are you going to believe in QAnon conspiracies?
No, we're not going to believe in any of those things. So, but it kind of looks like QAnon. I don't know. Yeah, of course not.
But their view, yeah. Well, this will be a review, and if anybody wants to go back and watch that presentation again too, to see how she laid it out. So, but what she's trying to show is that one belief, one world government, can be seen by two perspectives. And it's the two streams that give you those different perspectives. Parable methodology will give you the right view. Conspiracy theories will lead you to globalism, and all these things are the enemies. So yeah, well, we definitely need review on that one. Okay, so this continues the structure of the alpha presentation that she did in showing 1798 to 1865. And then showing, this is what the main thing, this is one of the key things that it opened up, is that in an alpha history, there's only one call to the church. And in an omega history, there's two calls to the church. Also in Babylon, there was two calls to the church, priests and Levites. So there's just in the Millerite history, this alpha history, there's only one call to the church. So whereas if you were to put this on for the 144,000 and you had 1989 there and you had 2019, you would have a 2021 here before you got to the Sunday law. But there's no waymark there because it's just one call to the church in the Millerite history and then one call to the world. And then this is the 144,000 line with the priests, Levites, and the Nethinims. Two calls to the church. You got the priest and the Levites. So you've got two calls to the church. So you can see 2021 is here. But when you go back to the other one, there's no waymark there. And then there's the call to the Levites, and then go to the world at the Sunday law. Okay. So the Oceania camp meeting, moving on to Oceania, this was our second camp meeting, and like the last, it's not divided into three presentations that composed it. In this camp meeting, we zoom in on the external political events of Millerite history. We had already covered 1798, Jedediah Morse, 1844, the spiritual declension. But now we want to see the issues within their politics because we're about 6 weeks from the US election. So we looked at those external political events. There's another layer a bit separate to the external Protestant events. We showed the Whig Party here, Henry Clay, the great compromiser, who was part of the Whig Party, his run in the significant 1844 election versus Polk, how that election decided the future course of the United States. They chose American expansionism, which is really a religious belief, and it led to the Mexican War of 1846, 1848, 1850, and the Civil War. So the American expansionism, a religious belief that led to the Mexican War of 1846, 1848, 1850, and then the Civil War. The 1844 election was the cause. The rest of the reform line is the effect of that cause. Then you had the Constitution, a compromise, or this was the one. Constitution was a compromise. And here again, we have Henry Clay, the great compromiser. You have the South, he was in the North. This might be backwards the way I have it. I just took it off of what she had on the board, but you had in the South, there was, she went through the first party system. Mainly the focus was on the second party system, which was 1828 to 1854. But you had these, and you can look these up on Wikipedia as well, the first party system, second party system, and the third party system. But the focus was here in this history here, 1828 to 1854. And what we saw was the line of what we saw was compromise in on the line. And especially the history from 1844 to the 1850 compromise directly parallels our own dispensation, ending at the Sunday Law, 1850 is the Sunday Law. We take all this and we make some applications, but we bring it to the 2020 election and we start disagreeing and dismantling the study of the last president. The internal message of this and that's kind of what the point was with Obama being the president during the Sunday Law history of 2014. Because still in this movement, there was a belief that Trump would win because Trump, the Republican, has to be in office in order for the Sunday Law to happen. So we start disagreeing and dismantling the study of the last president. The internal message of this dispensation is the Apis bull, which is compromise, and the Whig Party, which is compromise. And if we want to make application, that's not a Trump second term, that's a Biden presidency. So you start rattling a few feathers, and this particularly becomes an issue movement wide, but in the French field with a split that was already developing and those in opposition very much holding to the study of the last president. Then looking at the US states and states' rights, we come back to the subject of equality, the principles of force versus choice. This brings some questions in people's minds, and I address some of them on the 3rd of October, the next presentation. So this was the board on Henry Clay. First political speech he gives in 1798, then you have the Missouri Compromise here, and then you have the compromise tariff and the Whig Party formed. Here's that other line that we were talking about a little bit later. This is it. She goes over this as well again. So what we're meant to see here was the conservative side, FFA versus the Midnight Cry, and the Republican Party on this side of the line. And on this side of the line in the wilderness, we need to see the Democrat and the compromise to be able to rightly align and understand heading into the 2020 election that we were not looking at a Trump second presidency, we were looking at a presidency of compromise, which lined up with 1844 to 1850. So the 3rd of October, the change of leadership, parts 1 and 2. We give a history, the overview of the Midnight Cry to October 2020, where we are. So we try and retrace some of our steps so people don't lose the development of the message. Why is it important to not lose the development of the message? Anyone?
So we understand how we got where we are.
Yeah, what is it? What is it? There's a, I guess if I kind of want to ask, so there's a cause and effect. What would be the effect of understanding where we are, how we got here?
Could explain it to someone else.
What does it do for us personally to maintain the development of the message?
Helps us connect the dots and to be able to see how everything's being thread together.
had a particular point I was thinking that to try to get to, but if we were in math, which I'm not good at, and we started out with algebra, and we went through this once before, Victoria, you might have to help me. You can't jump from one to the other. You need to see the development. So you're understanding the concepts that build upon each concept. And what does that do for us personally? When we understand this concept, we move to the next concept, we move to the next concept. What is it doing to us personally and as a movement?
Elaine, could it be cause and effect or
Could it be what?
cause and effect?
Cause and effect. I was thinking about our faith. There's a lot of different ways, things you can say, but I was particularly thinking about how it strengthens your faith.
Yes. Amen.
The
And,
cords get thicker.
The cords get thicker. Right. Right. So if you miss concepts and you keep plugging along the way, you might come to the wrong understanding and you won't have faith necessary to go all the way through. So then we again bring up the Apis bull as it illustrates the present state of Adventism. We go on another tangent here, but a fun one, and begin discussing fractals. But we're going to carry that over and cover it properly in the next presentation. Instead, I started addressing a question that had been arising in the movement, which was this compare and contrast that had been taught through 2018 to 2019 between Donald Trump and Elder Parmenter, and any impact that the 2020 election would have on that. I can't quite see that top line there. There we go. The campaign in 2015, you have Trump and Parmenter. In 2015, Elder Parmenter is teaching. He's anointed in 2016, and then Trump is elected in 2016. And is it going to have an effect in the movement here when Trump is not elected? So now on to the 10th of October, we come back to that study of the fractals. I don't think I skipped a page, did I? Yeah, no, I didn't. Now on the 10th of October, we come back to that study of the fractals. Christine, do you happen to have, I can't look at it. I think there's quite a few more pages left. You were right on top of that last time, so I thought I'd ask you.
There's 69 pages.
69? We're gonna have to pause here soon then, because we're not gonna get through that quickly. So now on the 10th of October, we come back to that study of the fractals, the nature of fractals, part 1 and 2. We discuss the scientific history and development of the understanding of fractals. We give examples of how they occur in nature and mathematics, and then we spend the rest of the presentation discussing how a correct understanding of fractals impacts how we understand the reform line. So we see the fractals, we see the big line, and then we see the fractal lines here. So that presentation was in the morning of October 10th, but on the evening for Elder Tess, October 10th, she presented again, and this was a presentation for the French ministry, the Apis bull, a warning. We're 2 weeks away from the French camp meeting, and this served as like a prelim to that camp meeting. And knowing the various shakings developing in various parts of the world, including France, the topics presented were somewhat deliberate. So it's here that we introduced a timeline of the whole 6,000 years of the Great Controversy. If we put the whole big picture into context, it has many implications, especially as we take inspiration back and trace it through that 6,000-year timeline, and how limited God is in trying to slowly educate his people. And it's a bit of a warning to the French world, but to the whole movement. We reviewed the Apis bull, how that impacted ancient Israel, how then we have to see the idolatry in modern Israel, how that idolatry in modern Israel is just an extension of Protestantism, which is an extension of the papacy. Moving from the increase of knowledge to a discussion of the formalization. So we say that formalization is a revelation of the glory of God. and it always comes with a shaking. People either look at that revelation of the glory of God or the character of God, and they hate it or they love it, but it always shakes. So that's what we, at 2021, you got the priest line, and then you have the 144,000 line. Formalization brings the character of God. So I think that maybe we'll pause here and we'll relook at the schedule, how to finish this one out. We might finish it next Sabbath and take part 2 and put it somewhere else. Page 47. Maybe we can get through both next time.
There's nothing in the afternoon next Sabbath.
Okay. Oh, okay. Page 46 or 47, I just said. I think I said 47.
47 is the picture that you're on right now.
Okay. We can do that because I'm doing part 2 anyways. So she goes into the French camp meeting, which is the whole last portion of this is the French camp meeting. So rather than try to take on that topic, we'll continue that next week and then pick up on number 2 after that.
Okay, so you're saying you're going to finish part 1 and then start and then do part 2 next Sabbath.
Right.
Okay, great.
Right. And I don't know if it'll fill all the time, but we'll see when we get there. Victoria, would you like to close in prayer?
Sure. Our Heavenly Creator, the great I am, I just humbly come before you, thanking you for this opportunity we have to gather together and spend and study, Lord. I pray that the truth we have gleaned from reviewing the presentations, or to say the presentation presented by Elaine, Lord, that it would settle well in our hearts and that we would make it practical in our lives and understand it so that we're better prepared to share with others. And I just pray that you would be with us as we continue in our Sabbath studies, that your presence be with us, that we'll all be blessed and come away ready to be a blessing. And I just thank you again in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.